I'd like to introduce Satish.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Welcome, guys. Appreciate you guys taking time. You guys want to come forward? How about you guys? You want to come forward? It's better to have a closer interaction, right? My name is Satish Chandrasekaran. I'm part of CA's IT organization. I manage application development teams for CA's customer-facing business applications. Salesforce is one of the competency that I manage. And today's case study that we are going to discuss is about how we are using CA release automation for Salesforce deployments. Before we started this journey with release automation, release management was really one of our biggest challenge. We were taking way too much time in moving our configurational changes across various environments, right? And every time we would be taking the changes, there would always be failures when we were pushing our changes to production, right? For various reasons. We'll get into the details as we go along, right? Over the last 6 to 8 months, I think we have a great story to share. I think we made a steady progress using the solution. We have about 80% reduction in our release errors during deployment, and release times reduced by 4 to 5 times. I'm really excited to be here sharing the learning and experience from this journey. This is just a brief abstract. Let's get into the details. Let's do a quick poll by show of hands. How many of you are really using Salesforce for your CRM or using Force.com as a platform for your application development? Can you just... Are you really facing issues in your release management process? Do you have challenges? Can you raise your hands if you're having challenges? OK. So we're all in the right place, right? Let's quickly run through the agenda, right? I'm going to quickly touch on our Salesforce landscape, what we have, the challenges, we'll discuss a little more in detail, which you guys will echo. We're going to be looking at the various tools that we used along with release automation to basically do the automation. So we'll go into the details of that. We're going to look at the solution in 2 parts. As I said, this was really a journey for us, right? We started implementing a solution, and then in the process, we had a lot of learnings out of that, and then we continuously improved on that, and then we have a better solution. So I'm going to take the solution through 2 parts. The first part is going to be the initial pilot that we went with, and then the improvements, and then what is the new updated solution that we have. We're going to be looking at some of the actions which have been recently released, which is basically available, which is going to really help in writing your business process or the workflows, which is going to be easier to write the workflows. So we'll go into those details. We're also going to be looking at the various release models we have for Salesforce, right? And then definitely at every point, we'll be discussing the lessons learned. And we will also be having a comparative analysis between what was the before and what is the current situation. So if you really look at our Salesforce footprint, it's a pretty busy footprint, right? Our business really keeps us pretty busy in this platform. We have both the Sales Cloud implementation, which is basically for all the sales process automations. And then we also have the Service Cloud implementation, which is basically for all your case management and call center automation processes. We're also looking at the communities platform, which is recently introduced. We're also looking at that. So basically, this is really going to be an expanding platform for us. Apart from that, we have integrations with multiple third-party systems, which is inside Salesforce. We have a quoting engine, which is integrated with Salesforce, which is Sterling Commerce. So there are a lot of integrations which happens with Salesforce. On top of it, we also buy solutions from the marketplace. So on the basic capabilities which are offered by Salesforce, if there is something which we want to really extend, we buy solutions from the marketplace which works on top of the basic capabilities that Salesforce has. We also use the platform for some custom development. So if there is something which is probably not offered by the platform, if there is something which we want to really innovate, we basically try to bridge the gaps where instead of buying a solution, we go and build that innovation within ourselves. So there is definitely custom development which we do. So there are multiple instances that we manage. There are some instances that we really acquired from the acquisitions that we have done in the past. And if you really see the number of environments that we manage, it's a pretty big size, right? So if you really look, the number of dev environments, the number of QA environments, right? And managing all this, keeping all the environments in sync for the various projects, which is all going parallel, it's not an easy task. It's really a daunting task. So let's touch on the challenges which we really have with Salesforce, right? Deployments. So one thing which we started off with is we didn't really have a standard release process. We were doing monthly deployments. We were doing quarterly deployments. What goes into these deployments was slightly different, right? So your monthly deployments are basically deployments which are small and medium changes. And then when you talk about quarterly deployments, these are deployments which are bigger projects, which probably have integrations with other third-party systems. It probably have a wider impact, right? So they definitely need to go through rigorous testing, right? And the way how we were doing these quarterly deployments also was slightly different, because when we do these deployments, we don't want anybody in the system doing something, right? So we basically lock all the users, we turn off all the integrations, we turn off all the bad jobs, and then we have to push in all these code and configuration, which is all the metadata. And then once there could be a ton of data loads that needs to happen, right? Which you guys will be familiar, right? And then once the data loads are done, everything is done, then you probably go in and then unlock all the users. You go in and turn on your integrations, bad jobs, all that, right? And all this is all done out of pages of documentation which is provided by the build teams to your platform administrators, who then have to look at all those documents and then execute the document, right? And this is all very manual. It is all cumbersome. It takes time. And more than that, it is very error prone, right? So the other challenge is Salesforce is really a metadata-driven platform. What that means is, along with the data which is residing in the cloud, your code and configuration is also residing in the cloud. So basically, it's completely metadata. So I can derive the definition of your code and your configuration through the metadata, right? So as a developer or as a business analyst, if I'm configuring Salesforce in my dev sandbox, and if I have to if I made some configuration changes, and if I want to move those changes from the dev sandbox to the QA sandbox, you need some kind of a vehicle to do that. Salesforce provides a very rudimentary vehicle which is called change set, right? Either you have to do it manually or you have to use the change set, right? Using change set is again manual, because you have to go in and tell what are the various changes that you want to really shift and then lift and then move it to the other environment, right? So it's not really a very user-friendly tool. It is very manual, and it has its own limitations, because every time you want to do this, you have to do this for every source and target combination. It's not like your Java application or a .NET application where you have bundled it into a deployment artifact like an EAR or jar, which you can just ship across all the environments, right? These are very granular configurational changes which basically somebody has to go in and say that, okay, I'm creating a change set. These are the different things that I have made. First, I have to keep track of all those changes. Without forgetting, I have to add all this into the change set, and then somebody has to move this change set from source to target, right? And again, moving from QA to prod, again, I have to go through this exercise again. So it is all manual. It takes a lot of time, and you really spend too much time doing all this in your development cycle, which is eating up your development time. So the other big challenge of the change set is Salesforce is a very test-driven platform, right? So if I am basically customizing a code, right? If I'm writing an Apex class, if I'm writing a trigger, right? Salesforce mandates that you write a test class, unit test class, which is similar to your JUnit, right? You have to basically back that code with the test class, right? So this test class, Salesforce is not going to accept any code into production unless you have code which is backed by a unit test class, and that unit test class has at least 75% test coverage, right? And all those tests have to be successful, right? So when I'm really pushing my code into production, Salesforce will run all those battery of tests, and then if any of them fails, it'll tell me that it's not going to take the code, and I have to go fix the problem. But with change set, all this running of these tests, when I'm doing it in a non-production environment, all those tests don't run. So typically what happens is when I'm making my change, I'm not able to give my developer the early feedback where if something is going to break in production, I really don't know. Only when I'm pushing it to production, I really know that I didn't write my test class, or maybe my test class coverage is not 75%, or maybe some test class because of some data has really failed and that failure happened only in prod. So typically what happens is we were spending so much time doing all this in production during the production cutover window where we were stretching our development window, cutover window, right? So we were taking about 10 to 12 hours to do a Salesforce deployment. So this was the biggest challenge that we were having. So if I have to really summarize this, we were spending about 20% of the development time, right, doing all this manual activities, right, one tracking, one doing all this shift and lift of all these configurations, and then when I'm really doing a production deployment, I'm basically having failures. I have to go back, fix the problems. So it's a lot of cycle time unnecessarily which is being wasted, right? And we want to really see how we can free up this time so that we can do better things to our business, right? So that was our goal. Okay, so let's quickly touch on the release automation tool chain, right? So the key thing here is the deployment pipeline. We want to really see how we can create a frictionless deployment across all the stages that we had, right? So what are the tools that we used? Definitely release automation is the orchestrator, right? It is basically the coordinator which is basically going to coordinate all the releases. And then we had the release actions, which is the SFDC actions, which are recently released, which is available now. So these are the other tools. And then the underlying stuff which we were communicating to Salesforce is all through the Salesforce metadata APIs. Salesforce has exposed everything through APIs. So initially, when the actions were not available, we were using all the generic actions which are available by the release automation. And then the AND scripting was used, and the Force.com migration toolkit, the CLI tools which are provided by the Salesforce. So these are the underlying tools which are basically used to basically interact with Salesforce in order to create the automation pipeline. From an agile testing perspective, as I said, we wanted to really see how we can do a shift left. All the problems which were happening when we were pushing our changes to production, we wanted to really see how we can bring them early in the game during our build, right? So again, there we used metadata APIs to basically see how we can run those tests as part of the automation. So we'll get into the details of how the solution is. On the configuration management side, Salesforce didn't really have a version control system, right? So they don't really keep track of who made the change, when was the change made, all that they don't really have, right? So we needed some kind of a tool where we are able to track all that. So that in our initial solution, we used Subversion, so where all the metadata is basically versioned. And people were more used to working directly into the cloud in Salesforce. So we had to tell them use Eclipse so that you can basically download the metadata definition and then store the definition in Subversion. Okay, so let's briefly get into the solution, right? So if we really look at the solution, what we wanted to achieve first was we definitely want to cut down on all the tracking that happens in terms of what are the various configurations which are being done by the developers or the BSAs, and once the change set creation process, all that we want to completely eliminate, right? We wanted a process where I, as a developer or a BSA, is working on a release and making some change. I should be able to automatically track what the changes are for that particular release, right? And then I should be exactly knowing what are the different components which are touched for a release, so that I can automate the complete deployment pipeline, so that it is easy to completely automate the process. So what we did was we introduced Subversion. So I, as a developer or a BSA, when they are making a change, what they would do is they would make the change on Salesforce, test it, and then they'd come back to Eclipse and then download the metadata definition and then store the definition in Subversion, right? Once they store the definition in Subversion, what we did was we created a continuous integration process within release automation, which would pull all the recently made changes from Subversion, and it would basically deploy that change into the integration lab. Before deploying it into an integration lab, it would run all those battery of tests that would run when we run in production, right? So the whole idea here is if there is a developer who probably writes an Apex class and he forgets to write the test class, we wanted to give that feedback early to the developer so that the developer can go and write the test class, right? Or if there is a situation where a developer has written a unit test class, but then the coverage is not 75%, right? He has not probably covered all the scenarios, right? We want to give that feedback back to the developer early so that he can go and fix the problem so that we don't have to have all these problems coming in during production. So once we achieved that, to start with, we want to really take baby steps towards continuous application delivery, right? We wanted an approach where things should automatically flow from your dev to an integration lab, where if there are conflicts between developers working on multiple things, those conflicts have to be caught early and informed to the developer so that they can go and fix the problem, right? Run those tests. But then after integration lab to your QA environment or to your staging environment or to production, the process that we wanted was it should be more like a self-service, right, on demand. But then we would want to empower the people who's basically owning those things, right? Take the case of QA environment, right? Once a build is ready for QA, right, there would be an alert which would go to the QA manager. The QA manager would be the person who would say, okay, I'm ready to consume this build, right? And then he would go and click the button. That's when that build would come into the QA environment, right? So we wanted to really empower this because the QA guys are consuming the build. Similarly, when you want to move it to production, it would be the build teams which would create a release, and then it would generate an alert. It will get to the production support guys, who would then, on that day after the change order is approved, they would go click the button, and then that would basically sync the environments on the production. So the objective with respect to the deployment pipeline that we wanted was more like a self-service driven, and it should be something where we should be able to do it through a click of a button, right? Whereas in the previous approach, it was all manual documentation, where people had to follow all the steps in the documentation and then do manually, right? Here, we have cut down all that, and then we would be doing it through a push of a button, because all the changes which have been tracked is all tracked, and then it's flowing across these environments. So exactly we know what are the metadata definitions which are basically touched as part of a release. It crossed dev, it came to QA, it got validated in QA, and then it will go to prod. So once we put the solution, we had a lot of learnings, right? So let me talk about the benefits we immediately realized, right? The benefits we immediately realized was we definitely saw an improvement in the deployment time that we were taking, right? Previously, we were taking about 10 to 12 hours during a deployment because we were seeing a lot of release errors. With all this continuous integration, what we saw was we really saw shift left happening, where we were able to catch the problems early. So the time that we were taking to deploy got shrinked. So we were able to deploy production deployments in probably 3 to 4 hours, right, from about 10 to 12 hours. But along with that, we saw some other overheads, right? Typically in Salesforce, people are more used to working directly on Salesforce, and then Salesforce has both the developer community, also the BSA community, who are not really tech savvy, right? Who probably understand the business, they know how to do the configurations, but then we have to tell them use Eclipse, use Subversion. So those were tools that they were not familiar with, right? And probably some of the metadata definitions for checking them into Subversion was really little cumbersome. So we were spending little more time during our build process for basically enforcing people to check in all these things, because people are more used to directly working in Salesforce. Now we have added an extra step where we are saying you have to go and check in things into Subversion. So that didn't really go that well. So these were some learnings and observations that we received after we put the solution in. So once we got these two learnings, the next goal for us was to really see how we can help with these two learnings that we got, right? One big learning from an implementation standpoint, which I didn't mention about, is a lot of the implementation, the under the hood implementation which was done for this was all using generic actions. So RA didn't really have any integrations with Salesforce to start with when we started the solution. So we had to really depend on some of the generic actions which were provided by RA, and a lot of scripting was done with Ant. So we wanted to really see how we can make it a little more simpler, and if for people to really adopt from an implementation standpoint, we want to really see how we can simplify this. That's when we started interacting with the product management and the engineering team, and we identified that we can probably have some actions which would really help in designing these workflows in a simpler way, where a lot of the customizations or the custom plumbing which was done with scripting can all be avoided. So we have about 4 actions which are available, which is discovery action, retrieve action, validate action, and the deploy action. So I want to talk a bit about the discovery action. So one of the other learnings from the previous solution that we had was with respect to the subversion, right? So we wanted to completely avoid using subversion. So we found out a way where we can automatically discover the changes as the developer or the BSAs are making in their development sandbox, right? So we are again using all Salesforce APIs to do this. So I, as a developer or a BSA, is making a change for a release, we can automatically discover what changes are being made. So that way what's happening is I don't really have to go in and say, okay, these are the different things that I touched for this particular release, and I'm going to check this in, right? So be it using the change set or be it using your check-in process, there is a manual intervention because somebody has to go and tell that this is the change I did and please include this, right? With this, what we have done is this got packaged inside this action which is currently available GA. So you could basically come up with a workflow stitching all these different actions, which is going to be very simple because you can configure it in a way where it's going to automatically discover the changes that's happening in a dev environment, right? And then it's going to bring those changes into your integration lab. So that's a cool thing because you don't really need any manual intervention. We have completely avoided the manual intervention. So talking about the other actions, you have the retrieve metadata. So once you have discovered those changes which are being done, the next action which is going to be useful is basically your retrieve metadata. So the discovery gives you an output which is basically an XML which is going to give you all the definitions of what it has discovered. You need to basically extract that from your source. So the retrieve metadata is going to be helpful to retrieve all that metadata instances from your source organization. And then the validate. The validate action is going to be useful for running all those test classes, right? So if whatever test classes which are going to be run in your production, using this action which you're going to stitch in your workflow, what's going to happen is all those test classes, all those test executions would be run, and if there are failures, it's going to tell you what the failures are, right? And then finally, the deploy metadata. So this action is going to be really useful to deploy all the metadata into your target instance. Okay, so using these actions, what we did was we changed the solution which we had first, right? So if you really look at the solution here, the only change here is things are going to be automatically discovered. We really don't have a subversion process where people are not going to be manually bringing in their changes and checking in their changes into subversion. As for a given release, if I'm working on, say, 10 different things, and I have made those 10 different changes in my dev environment, with this auto-discovery process, all these 10 changes would automatically flow in from dev to the integration lab. If there are failures, the failures would be given to the developer. The developer would go and fix the problem, right? So it's an iterative process. And the rest of the process is pretty much the same. The only other stuff which we are kind of still working on it, we have some pieces of it working, is basically the integration to the application test. We wanted to see how we can have a regression test built on CA application test, which is a different product, right, CA product. So as I'm making my small changes, I don't want something to be broken, right? Every change that is being introduced into the platform, we want to really see that we can run all the integration, all the regression tests, and then if there are going to be failures, we need to know those failures early. right? So the process that we have set up is, we have set up a nightly process where these regression tests would be running on CA application test. We still don't have a whole bunch of regression test suite created. We just have few and we are building on it. So the whole idea is we would have this more like a nightly build, which would basically kick in all these tests and then give those feedback. So if there is a regression test failure, the morning the developer comes, he knows exactly what are the regression tests which have failed, and he can go and fix the problem. So that's the whole idea here. So what are the lessons learned from the second part of the solution which we improvised? Definitely, whatever we were seeing from an initial upfront time that we were spending in terms of checking things into Subversion, all that time we started saving. We definitely were saving time when we were pushing things into production because we were catching all errors early, right? So overall, the solution was really powerful because we were able to shrink the entire time from 10 to 12 hours of deployment to 1 to 2 hours of deployment. So I'll talk a bit about the various release models that we have in Salesforce that we have built, right? As you understand, Salesforce is a platform which has both the code and config and data, right? So the way how we came up with this release model is, as of now, we have 3 release models. We are definitely going to extend a little more. So you could have a deployment which is just going to be only configuration, right? You could have a deployment which could be code and configuration, right? And then you could have a deployment which could be release with user lockout, right? As I said, the big releases that we do, we want definitely no user in the system when we are doing the deployments. So the steps, the execution steps which would be done for each of these different types would be slightly different. So we have these 3 templates which we have created, which are more like release models. And the steps are going to be slightly different. The steps for your pre-steps, your deployment steps, your post-deployment steps are slightly going to be different. So this gives you an opportunity to basically standardize your release model, right? And the process is going to be very simple. Like from a build team, it is going to be, people have to just choose what is the type of template that they want, right? And then create a release. And once the release is created, the respective team who's going to be acting on the release is going to get an alert. They would basically work on the release, and they would just push the button to start the release. And everything will happen like a magic. So this is basically the comparative analysis, right? What was the time that we were taking before versus what is the time that we are taking today? So if you really see, we were taking a lot of time doing the manual tracking, right? With the legacy approach that we had to really keep track of all the time that all the different changes which are happening, right? And that's like people are spending about 16 hours per resource, right? For a given release. This is like average time. Now, since the tracking is all automatic, right? I don't really have to track anything, and the discovery process really discovers everything. I am totally cutting down on all that time. So it's a 0 hour required for tracking, right? The change set creation process is a very manual, cumbersome process, right? And we take about 24 hours per build. And with the current process now, we shrink that down to a 2-minute cycle per build, right? And the deployments, right? With all the failures, we were seeing about 10 to 12 hours per deployment, and now we have brought it down to 1 to 2 hours per deployment. Okay, so that pretty much concludes what I had to tell. Anybody has any questions?
Here you go.
Oh, sorry. In your CA environment, how frequently you discover the changes, and how your workflow runs to find the changes?
So it's a 30-minute interval.
Okay.
So it's a process that we have scheduled within release automation. So there is a scheduler component within release automation that we have leveraged. So it basically what it does is every 30 minutes it wakes up, tries to pull in, discover all the changes which the developers and the BSAs have done, and then it's going to pull them over into the integration lab.
if you're doing the parallel development, how the discovery process identify, okay, I have like two releases going on, and each release going to be deployed to one CA environment. How your workflow like manages the parallel deployment, parallel development.
Okay, so if I understand your question right, what you're asking is, if I'm really having a situation where I'm having a parallel deployment,
yes,
right?
No, parallel development.
Yeah, parallel development, but for a given release, right? The date is the same, right?
No.
Okay.
The date is same because pretty much now with agile deployment, development, you need to like release like sprints very frequently. There are like multiple teams like working on different changes, and each team wants to test their changes in their own CA environments. And how the workflow manages the parallel.
So the path for your release is going to be slightly different, right? So if I'm working on a release 1, right, or a sprint 1, my dev, QA, prod is going to be different from a different sprint, which is probably started early and still the teams are working on it. They would have a different path. So the environment paths are going to be different. At some point, see, the thing is, Salesforce really doesn't have a version control system. We don't have even a subversion, right? So all that we need to keep track is, we need to keep track of the merging within the environments.
Okay.
So if I'm having two separate tracks in which I'm doing parallel development, at some point, the changes have to be merged. And that happens at the environment level.
Okay. Thank you.
So was the ANT scripting a requirement from Salesforce, and then did you eliminate a number of the ANT scripts when you went to the actions?
Yes. So the whole idea behind that effort, working with Mark, was basically to cut down on all the customization, right? So definitely we don't want you guys, when you implement, go through all that pain, right? So that's the reason we have actions now, right? So the actions basically packages all of it and gives to you in a platter where you don't really have to worry about all the customizations which is done with Ant. So you can basically stitch these actions into a workflow, and then it would serve your purpose.
So is there ANT scripting still in your solution, or has that been resolved through all the actions?
From an implementation standpoint, with actions, you don't have to worry about Ant. You just have to use these actions in your workflow.
Good answer, thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have the notion of rollback? Yeah, Salesforce innately doesn't have that option, but do you have anything that you're addressing?
We definitely are looking at it. You're right, absolutely. We don't really have something like a rollback. Release automation has something called as rollback. It does it for the on-premise Java, .NET deployments, but Salesforce is a different beast. So this is definitely a problem that we are trying to solve. We'll work with Mark and team to really see how we can work on that. So as of now, I don't think there is anything that we have built for rollback for Salesforce.
Thank you.
Here we go. Yes. Hi, it's only curiosity. Why use subversion instead harvest?
How do I say this? The team. The teams were using it, so we just used it.
I have two questions. One was on the CA application test, which you are referring in the one of the slides. I would like to know more about that. What exactly is the tool you're going to focus on that application test? The other one is, do you have any action pack for Pegasus?
Mark, you want to take that?
Pega? Yeah, BPM product.
Pardon me. So we get a lot of requests for a wide range of action packs. And Salesforce was one that came from our own internal team. We collaborated with them and developed it. We have about 122 action packs now. It's about a 10x increase over what we had when we acquired Nolio about 2 years ago. So let me talk a little bit about the ideation process. So you have a great idea, Pegasystems, I'm familiar with it, BPM. You're the first customer that's ever asked for it though. And so I don't have it on the roadmap, I don't have it on the backlog, but that doesn't mean that, that there's not customer demand for that. So normally the way that we work in terms of handling our enhancement requests are through ideas that are posted to our user community, and then people can come in and say, hey, I think that's a great idea, upvote it. That gives me a sense of the customer demand and the priority for it. And then I can slot it appropriately. Now, if I can't build, I can't respond to every request. I just don't have the resources to do it. But one of the things that we've done recently is launch a rapid development kit that makes it super easy for a non-programmer to build an interface and an action pack very quickly. And the RDK is being demonstrated right over here at this first kiosk.
One more question?
No, can you go over on that application test?
So CA application test to my is a tool. Basically, you can have your automated regression tests, right? So the way how we are trying to use is we would be building our automated test cases there. So as we do our deployments, these test cases would be running in background, and we would get the feedback on these tests that we are running. Did that answer your question?
So what was the tool you guys using it?
CA application test.
Okay, it's a dev test one, which is Lisa?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Thank you. I just want to clarify, throughout the whole process, you're still using Subversion end-to-end for branch management, merge management, et cetera, retrofitting code? Because at one point I thought you said you stopped using Subversion, you don't need to use it anymore?
Yes, so the way how we are doing that is we are doing that, managing that through the environments. So Salesforce doesn't really encourage to really use a Subversion kind of a tool, because the way how they give the environments to us, you need to really manage the environments like a tree. So that's how we are trying to manage.
Okay, so if I need to run an audit against code deployments, where is all the version control stored for all the discovery, action, metadata, et cetera?
So RA is definitely going to track all that, all the deployments that it is doing, to which environments. So RA has reporting for all that capabilities. So Mark, you want to talk anything more on that?
But just to clarify, it's not true source control, it's just logging the changes and comparing the metadata?
Yes.
Okay. So the developers at no time then actually get their code out of the RA deltas, so to speak?
Correct.
Okay. So where do they get their code from?
It's going to be from the source environment. So if I'm really pulling in from my dev, it's going to be, the source is going to be dev. When I'm running my QA, it's going to be from integration. When I'm doing my staging, it's going to be from QA. When I'm doing my prod, it's going to be from staging.
Okay, and though you're saying those are not stored in source control?
Those are not stored in source control. Those are stored directly in the Salesforce cloud.
Oh, I see. Got it. That was the part that was missing for me.
Okay.
And there's an API then that I can use to do reporting on the deltas, et cetera. Okay. Is there a name for that process or that feature in Salesforce?
It's all metadata APIs.
Okay. Thank you.
One race is coming.
Just to tag on the previous question, to audit, there's audit on the current release, there's audit on the previous releases, so to speak. Is there any way to extend the release automation process, and if we use release automation, any potential to extend that to connect to Subversion or source control to start tracking those changes?
Possible.
Stay on this end of the row. So there is integration, what we call a getter inside of RA. So we integrate with source controls systems. I think in this particular case, it's due to the model, the way that Salesforce doesn't have a native notion of version control. Now, originally they used to use Subversion, and they were capturing metadata, checking things in, checking things out. You could go back to a hybrid process like that, where you build artifact packages based on, and you use the version control systems and then pull the artifact packages into RA. But that's not really how Salesforce environment is designed, unfortunately.
Yeah, and as Mark is saying, so we have, you know, part of what you do here is develop these application models, which Satish and team have done. As part of that, we do have integrations, action packs into any number of different code, you know, versioning systems. So whether it's Subversion, it's Git, it's ClearCase, things like that. Those actions, those integrations exist. So you could model that as part of your processes, as part of grabbing that discovery, the change, to go ahead and automatically populate that. So if you wanted to store that, be able to do merging, comparisons, things like that, you could have that designed as part of your process.
Great. I think there was one question there.
Earlier you mentioned that you have a lot of integration to backend systems. Is this testing the backend integration as well, or solution as a whole?
So what we are really planning is to have the complete regression suite on application test. So which means that's a complete end-to-end integration. Because what happens is when I'm really creating a code, it basically starts from Salesforce and then it goes into the third-party systems, right? So definitely it is end-to-end. So from a testing standpoint, it is going to be end-to-end. Any more questions?
Thanks, Satish. I'm actually interested the Salesforce developers. So you said, you know, you basically took a day out of their week doing deployments, so 20% of the time, and they don't do that now. What's the reaction from the development team?
They are pretty much happy, because see, the whole idea is, one side the business was really on us to really demonstrate agility, because they wanted to really better things from us, right? And we were spending time on this, right? So from a developer standpoint, we have cut down on all the manual work, right? So they are definitely happy, very happy.
Yeah, I think this goes along with some things I heard from the different keynotes yesterday and today. Jennifer from Rent the Runway yesterday, and who was it? Chris from Nike today was talking about, you know, the experience that you provide to the engineers, right? The developers, where all of this, you know, innovation and stuff like that's coming out. So this seems to go like right along that track, where you're taking away the constraints that they have that make their job, their innovation difficult, and giving them a platform here that allows them to have that time to innovate again. So very interesting. Appreciate it.
Thank you.